Everybody, thank you for joining us today, this afternoon. So I am going to call this work session in order. And we're talking today about the Department of Environmental Services, or otherwise known as the Department of Everything Under the Sun. I'm joined, our board chair, Libby Garvey, will be soon with us. So as the vice chair, I'm going to preside over this meeting for the time until she arrives. I'm joined by my colleagues, Susan Cunningham, Matt Ferranti, and Maureen Coffey. So thank you so much for everybody for being here. This is the third work session in the fiscal year 2025 budget cycle. And we are all ears to hear about the presentation of the Department of Environmental Services, and also from the involved commissions, Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission, C2E2. I saw John there. Thanks for joining us in person. And the Transportation Commission, I guess the chair, Mr. Chris Latt, will be joining us either virtually or in person later.
And your chair's finally made it too.
And the chair has made it. And
Go finish up. Go ahead. Finish up. Keep going.
So, the proposed budget, and just as a reminder, the proposed budget and video of the work sessions are available on the county websites. And you can go to arlingtonva.us and search for the fiscal year 2025 budget information, and you will find more than you would ever imagine that you could find. And I say that honestly because I do that myself almost every day these days. Mr. Manager, on to you to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Karantonis. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Manuel, and we have a little bit over 60 slides to go through. There'll be times for pauses, breaks, and over to you, Greg.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Thank you, Vice Chair, and Madam Chair, thank you. On behalf of the Department of Environmental Services, welcome. This is indeed the Department of Everything Under the Sun, and we will cover accordingly many, many different areas today. I'm joined by my very capable deputy directors, our budget team, and then really the real action is out in the work environment. There are about 800 people out there and hundreds of contract staff doing the mission every day. So we're going to do a quick visual overview and a quick recap of our many sustainability efforts and our Vision Zero outcomes relative to outputs. Then I'll go more deeply into the proposed general fund cuts and specifics on the proposed outright consolidation and reductions, our proposed development-related fee changes, and then at the board's direction, maybe we'll take a break for discussion and input from our commissioners. However, we did get a call or a notice from Chris Latt that he won't be able to make it. He's sick today, so I think he's going to try to join on the April 4th pay-go session.
That's fine.
So really, it's at your discretion where you want to take the break. I'll suggest a point maybe.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have our commissions and then have questions, but we may have some questions as we go through because there's a lot of slides here. So colleagues kind of, flag me down if I don't see that you got something. Go ahead.
So a lot to cover on the general fund, and then we'll round out with some details on the utility, stormwater, bulk and garage, and auto funds. So a quick context reminder why we're here, how we serve the community to make it accessible, resilient, and sustainable. Most of what we do in the operating budget is in the operation and maintenance and excellent customer service by contract and, of course, by our in-house teams. So this is the big picture behind over $349 million and 825 FTEs that are included in the proposed budget across all DES funds. So really, general fund is less than half of what we're covering today. This slide is an update we first did back in 2013 and 14. Given the Madam Chair's affection for these types of diagrams, it was time for an update.
Good, thank you.
It nicely illustrates how DES is everyone in our community, working in the background to ensure a safe and sustainable community. And while much hasn't really changed in 10 years, many things have evolved. I don't have time to go through the stats in each of our lines of business, but I will highlight just a few that represent numbers from FY23.
I think the river is new. Thank you. Go ahead, it's great.
We still maintain and pave our 1,058 lane miles of road, and we're on a steady trajectory to bring all 36 bridges to good condition. a much better place than we were a decade ago. Despite population growth, wastewater daily treatment volume is about the same, however, at 22 million gallons per day, given the prevalence of water-saving fixtures. And we're on a steady growth pattern with ART ridership just reaching past 2 million after the pandemic and given the changed nature of ridership away from the peak. Multimodalism brought more modes and trips, with over 260,000 trips on Capital Bike Share originating here, and now we have 7.54 miles of protected bike lanes. Those are also very popular for scooters and e-bikes. And with our focus on resilience, our traffic signals now perform much better during storms. We ensure a clean and sustainable community by providing glass recycling locations for community use, with 1,400 tons collected last fiscal year. Our curbside trash and recycling services serve 33,200 households, and this coming year, we expect to add a few EHOs to that service list soon. Our tree canopy also provided us 5,000 tons of leaves for curbside vacuuming. We're aggressively implementing EV chargers for public use. As of FY23, we had installed 11. We currently have 15 for public use. Fire Station 8 will complete soon, and many of those sewer and water lines you see have been relined or replaced. Our staff works hard to keep our over 90 county-owned buildings safe and maintained, embedding sustainability and energy savings or energy-producing principles in the projects. So there'll be more on our solar stats later part of the presentation. We're also working carefully to license those expanded TOSAs under the latest guidance. And while you can't see the parking occupancy sensors under the pavement, know that performance parking data will improve curb space turnover and inform what customers pay at our 5,700 meter spaces. So it's really your budgetary support, along with the support of our citizens and other funders, that make all this happen every day. So first, some highlights on what is unique in this year's proposed budget. Our general fund and other funds work synergistically already for sustainability, but the general fund budget is also then supplemented by the replenishment of $1 million added to the Flexible Climate Action Fund. Our proposed budget includes additions in targeted areas for things that are happening in FY25, including the opening of the Art Operations and Maintenance Facility, or AOMF, and the implementation of Service Labor and Trades, SLT, collective bargaining agreement. So in our important transit area, we're finding that balance between implementing ideas from the Transit Strategic Plan recently approved by the board, and then investing in sustainable new facilities for the long term, and optimizing, and in some cases, reducing service where the data and the performance numbers are clear, given the changed ridership patterns. So inclusive of the transit reductions, the proposed budget proposes $2.3 million in reductions, which really focused on finding efficiencies or reallocations. While sustainability is embedded throughout our lines of business, this slide highlights several obvious investments. The $1 million to replenish the Climate Action Fund. Beyond that, we have $1.5 million in PAYGO proposed for energy management project. One-time funding of $410,000 to fund the incremental cost to continue EV conversions. And though the next budget will address it, we are also on our way to completing the solid waste management plan, also known as the zero waste plan. Also, with grant funds from the Solid Waste Bureau, is undertaking an on-street food scraps compost bin pilot for multifamily residents. And that's scheduled to begin in the coming spring or summer. So the ongoing and systemic commitment has led to significant recognition of our community, from LEED Platinum certification to top ratings in facility, transparency, and environmental leadership programs. For that proposed $1 million in the Climate Action Fund, these are our initial proposals and projects to continue to change energy behaviors and decisions. And so while we don't have the specifics yet, a building energy pilot for low-income housing would provide rebates for home electrification and other energy measures. Grants would then fund the delta between gas and electric installation. Projects could include electric heaters, hot water pumps, lighting, enhanced insulation, things like that. Also, a pilot in the right-of-way for public EV charging. we would focus on 1 or 2 residential or multifamily areas where the right-of-way may be a more practical or cost-effective area than a private space. This one I'm really interested in. For off-grid resilience and speed of implementation, we plan to install a solar-powered EV charger to be installed on the courthouse surface lot. And then for facilities, we would use the Climate Action Fund to combine with the pay-go at the court's police building so we can convert to 100% LED conversion in FY25. And then as we undertake overdue renovations at the Oakland Street Warehouse or the police department, we would insulate and electrify the heating system with a heat pump. And since we're proposing an additional $1 million for the CAF, a quick update on the use of the prior funding. We are currently in design development for an electric heat pump system at the Madison Community Center. And finally, after many rounds of design with Dominion, we are getting underway this month with public EV charging in the Courthouse Plaza lot. When that's complete, it will bring the number of public chargers to 21. And then we are nearly complete with our community choice aggregation legal evaluation with the county attorney. So this next slide is jumping ahead a bit before our April PAYGO work session, but to give you a full picture of the energy investments, here's a quick preview of proposed investments. $300,000 for county facility renewable energy installation will support structural analysis, design work, and panel upgrades at Central Library, the Equipment Bureau, and the North Quincy facilities. And then $250,000 for EV chargers for the county fleet. $500,000 for public locations would include the Bargroff Community Center and Garage, Lover Run, and Walter Reed Community Center. And then $475,000 for energy performance upgrades for county buildings. That's the 76% portion of LED lighting retrofits. The CAF would fund the remaining 24%. So it's really important to give context to the $500,000 included in PAYGO for public chargers, since this is an area for potentially dynamic growth. In the county, based on the records we're able to obtain, our current EV ownership is about 2% of all vehicles owned. That's slightly above the regional average. Most of those are charged through in-garage level 1 chargers in single-family homes. So we currently have 15 chargers for public access, and by the end of 25, we are projecting 83 chargers. That's a 450% increase. And so while we as local government are not responsible for constructing and maintaining a full EV charging network, we do have 3 goals in mind. Leading by example, providing early equitable distribution of those charging stations, and really to serve as like a demonstration stimulation model for Dominion Energy and private owners, so hopefully they scale up the charging network. So in the case of Dominion, they are facing some headwinds or challenges as they expand their grid capacity and the circuits to allow for large-scale EV deployments, because it's a big power draw. The soon-to-be-released carbon-neutral transportation master plan will dedicate a full section to a strategic charging siting analysis, and it has origin-destination metrics, current and future EV ownership, supply-demand analytics, traffic models, and siting opportunities. We'll further develop that over the next 5 years, and that will hopefully be used to inform a broad range of actions by public and private sectors. Because the regional context is often very important, we just went live earlier today, and I think Michelle sent to you a copy of this, with an interactive greenhouse gas dashboard that takes the best available information we could find and compares it to how we're doing relative to our neighbors. Users can trace a wide variety of important sustainability measures and outcomes, such as those shown here, where our energy use intensity compares, for example, very, very favorably to Fairfax, and our percent of fleet conversion to EV, and of course, our CPACE progress. So we're hopeful that these user-friendly platforms highlight the hard results of the county's sustainability leadership, and that they then in turn educate and encourage behavioral change amongst our residents and our businesses. I'd also like to report on our significant progress with solar on county facilities and show our projections, since solar projects take time, particularly when they're associated with new construction or coordinated with a roof replacement. So over there on the y-axis, on the left, is the number of panels and how we add more with each project. Each project shown on the x-axis, that it's variable depending on the roof area that we have to work with. The gold line, in turn, shows cumulative kilowatt production capacity, and we are projected to increase on-site production from the current 70 kilowatt in '23 to a projected 1,066 in 2026. So that'd be an increase of 1,423%. So 397 kilowatt, or roughly 30% of that total then, will be just from the one project, the AOMF project. So to further understand the scale, though, our total on-site in FY26 will still be about only 2.7% of the Maplewood facility, which is that huge project where there's a room to achieve that really large-scale impact. So we need to continue to look for those large-scale opportunities when they are there. As a percentage of fleet for our non-public safety sedans, we're on a fantastic trajectory shown by the slope of those green bars shown there, and towards 61% if all of our FY25 plan buys execute, which would then exceed the goal that we had set of 40% by '25 in our CEP roadmap milestone. We're very blessed. Due to the small size of the county, EVs work really well for most of our mission needs. That puts us in a really strong position relative to our neighbors. They have different battery and mileage dynamics, and they have tended to favor hybrid options. We started with hybrids. We're going to a lot of EVs. We may also end up with hybrids depending on what the market has to offer, particularly for some of the larger vehicles. We'll just see how the market develops. And we've implemented the board's funding. Last year's presentation, you had encouraged that, and we implemented the 5 electric bikes, which are now in use as part of our county motor pool. I think that's not one of them, but similar to that. In response to the board's budget guidance on outcomes, DES focused on our Vision Zero initiative. The program output measures on the top there track things like multimodal safety improvements installed, safety report a problem request, average time to close those requests. The outcome measures down the bottom track severe or fatal pedestrian and bike correctable crashes. Correctable means we exclude the distracted or the impaired crashes. So severe and fatal crashes increased in '23 calendar year, which correlates to a 6% increase in speed-related crashes in '23. So we've concluded that reducing speeding is necessary to reduce injuries. So our emphasis on future improvements will focus on speed control and things like lane narrowing, adding concrete or tactical curb extensions at intersections, potential expansions of tools like tactical speed humps, speed limit lane markings, speed feedback signs, and center lane hardenings, which slows left-turning vehicles. All right.
So this is a natural break? Yeah, I think we're on the same. So I just wanted to see this because this is the general overview. I'm going to ask you.
General overview, and then
Yep.
we'll jump into the general fund after
I'm going to
that.
ask one general overview question in a way, and then see if my colleagues have some. We'll try, obviously, a lot more slides to go. This is great, and that's the Lubber Run Community Center that's going to really get a lot more of a solar online, right? How is Dominion Power doing in providing power not only to us, but to all those data centers? That's one of my kind of concern. Is everything like good with that? Because I think they just take so much energy. How's Dominion doing keeping up with that?
I think that again, I can't speak for Dominion, and when we do try to ask them, we don't get a whole lot of great answers about what they're doing for grid resiliency, because I think, to be fair to them, they're trying to figure it out. There are those
That's my
huge new
guess.
demands and projects, and I think what we're seeing is because their resources, just like everyone else, they have limited resources of talent, and they have to shift to meet the demands of those huge projects. And that might be why for our smaller scale projects that we're trying to do, sometimes it takes a lot longer than we would like.
Yeah, thank you.
That's how it affects us. And in terms of how overall they're doing, I'd have to defer to them.
Yeah, no, that's fine, because these are great plans, but if the power's not there, then they're not going to go so great. Okay, Mr. DiFranti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a Washington Post article in the last 3 or 4 days about how they're struggling. Or broadly, utilities are struggling, and I think Dominion is referenced in there just because of Northern Virginia. Lubber Run Community Center, because it's there, does that mean we have a contract or some level
No,
of?
we tried the PPA, we had a PPA contract, and the PPA contract died.
Yeah.
And so now we're trying, under our new contract, to breathe life back into that. And we will see if they're willing to go with us. If they, we'll call that question under the contract, and if they can't make it a go, then we'll come back to the board with, option 3, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. We'll keep
Great,
trying.
thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just had, it's a
One more, go ahead.
Climate Action Fund. We have spent 700,000 of the million we had last year, and there's 300 left. We're re-upping it to $1 million, is that right?
We're going to add another $1 million, and we also plan to, this year, we plan to spend some of the other money on another project. I forgot, Tyler, we were talking about that yesterday.
We've encumbered that amount of the current $1 million, but we have a plan to execute it. Of the unallocated amount, we have just recently made a request to to DMF to access some of it to complete the Courthouse Plaza EV charging project.
So it's a new full 1 million that we would be adding through this process. Thank you. That's great.
Beautiful
All
amount.
right, Mr. Karantonis?
Happy to hear that Courthouse Plaza is going ahead. And I saw that the solar-powered ones is in addition to the regular ones. I have a question about the distribution of public charging station. I noticed on the map there's nothing along Langston Boulevard. So there is one in Madison, 6 stations, but Langston is kind of empty. This is kind of a zone that I don't see, and we just passed a plan, and we have both fire station number 8, and across the street we have the community center. I don't know if there is any consideration of looking at this. This is really a place where, if you ask me intuitively, what I would think first of, north of Route 50, I would think of Langston, I would think about this location. Maybe there is a good reason for why this is not included here, but I would nice to know about that.
When we release the carbon neutral transportation master plan, there'll be some details on some of the areas, and we'll look at the areas specifically. I don't have that answer off the tip of my tongue, but we'll look.
Okay, thank
The
you.
answers should be within.
I don't doubt that there is an answer. It's just, I see a good distribution of, of the system growing and being more available. It's also would be very interested to know about how it has worked for a year plus in the limited number of places that we had public charging. I've seen a lot of good uptake, especially down in Long Branch and in Long Bridge. So this is why I'm asking. Just was a curious thing for me.
Yep, thank you. Ms. Cunningham?
I also had a question about the charging network in terms of what demand analysis have we done, and do they pay for themselves? So that's one question, and a related question is, given that I would hope the answer is yes there, or soon to be yes, and that LED light replacements is sort of old school and pays back very quickly, are there much bolder climate action fund actions that we might be considering than those, I don't know, kind of table stakes?
Well, I'll try to answer the first one on the demand. I think that'll be an area for future metrics. We talked about that just generally because we have a relatively small number, and what the stats showing us so far. And we're roughly for the period of time where we think people would be changing the normal charging hours for most people, I think we were looking at about 1/3 of the time them actually being used. We've got our initial ordinance amount that we put out there. We may have to make some adjustments and changes to that over time, because in some cases we see people charging and then just staying there in the spot, right? They don't move once they're charged, and we don't have a great mechanism to incent them to leave right now under our thing. So there's policy issues that we'll have to figure out as we watch the data and the usage of them. There's always more bold actions to take relative to funding. I think, we can talk for an hour on this.
We'll talk more about it as we go through it.
But-
On the EV chargers, do they pay for themselves? Is the expectation that they be revenue neutral at some period?
We haven't really debated that at great length, but I think that would be an expectation where we're, providing them in public. that over time we'd want them to be sustainable financially, relative to what it costs to replace them and maintain them and service them. But we don't have enough data on that yet. We haven't lived out a full life cycle.
Gotcha.
I would add, we bring in about $1,100 a month in revenue, so it's not much. So they're not paying for like the capital investment, but it does cover the electricity usage and some of the overhead right now. But obviously, as like we get more uptick, hopefully we'd see that amount increase.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, I think Tyler added what I was going to speak to, but when we originally adopted the EV charging ordinance in July of 2022, the rate that we charged was basically to recoup and pay for themselves in regard to electricity usage, and we benchmarked other jurisdictions. What we didn't do is do a full recovery on the capital to install the chargers, because I think at the time, the board wanted to incentivize the usage. But I think it's probably, as we add additional charging points, we'll relook at that just to revisit the issue for the board.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Takis, go ahead.
As far as I remember, the idea was to lease the actual chargers from ChargePoint. If we had a contract, we actually even build out our own chargers that we owned from the past, and we put new ChargePoint chargers. So that's a contract that is fixed, and they need to maintain the charging infrastructure there. The fee was to cover all the other costs, so the variable cost. And frankly, it is the cheapest option right now. The limitation of charging is a software fix that is absolutely available. I mean, you just begin to charge more after 2 hours or so. So this is all fixable. It's an interesting thing to see how the demand is.
At some point, we need to have a whole work session just on
Absolutely.
this, I think. Thank you. On those charges, I think maybe a big alarm, like when they finish charging, an alarm can go off and a license plate reader takes a picture. It's just an idea. Ms. Coffey.
Changing a little bit to the outcome measures that you included for Vision Zero, I noticed that the future year estimates are going down for 24 and 25. Is that reflective of because we've completed projects, there will be less projects to complete in the future, or is it reflective of budget constraints? Or both?
You have me on that one, or you want to call Dan?
Yeah, I may want to, if Dan's here, if you want to speak to it.
Dan coming up. Dan Neighbors, our TEO Bureau Chief.
You have to press the button, so you're, yeah.
Sorry, I haven't done
That's
this
okay.
before. It's primarily reflective of increased costs of doing work.
Okay.
So, with the funding levels that we have, we see that the actual number of projects we will be able to do will go down.
Thank you.
That's the way a lot of things are. Thank you.
Okay.
Inflation, yeah, thank you. All right, I think we're ready to go on. Thank you. Mr. Manuel, although actually it's a work session, should we use first names? Greg, go ahead.
Okay.
All right, I'm Libby.
Thank you.
Go
Thanks,
ahead.
Libby.
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, moving on to the general fund. So big picture for the general fund, expenses are going up 2.3% or $2.7 million, primarily driven by salary and contract increase. Salaries actually go up even with FTE reallocations and a net reduction of 6.33 FTEs. Non-personnel increases 1.4 million. Those primary drivers include new facilities operations maintenance with the opening of the OMF. That's 658,000. That's offset by a transfer from TCF. Rental book increases driven by the EV premiums and heavy equipment inflationary pressures, and then the operations net of the reductions that we took. So those increases are net of over 2.3 million in DES reductions, which we'll do shortly. And on a positive note, our budget is supplemented by that CAF, but that shows up in the non-departmental budget. So reductions for DES totaled 2.3 million and 7.33 positions, and we worked hard to minimize the impact of service delivery, but 780,000 of that 2.3 impact service delivery. The rest are either efficiencies or transfers to other funds. For the FTEs, 2.83 are transfers, and the remaining are cuts, but they're all currently vacant or tied to a known retirement date. So I'll highlight a couple of the more significant cuts. First, the corrective maintenance. Over the past few years, given the pandemic effects, on vendor and supply delays, we have experienced savings in our corrective maintenance budget. So the 300 cut of ongoing funds is relative to a total budget of $4 million as a sense of a proportion. And we believe it right sizes the budget based on recent budget execution. However, looking at mid-year this year, more recently, just gave us more positive execution news. So we're now kind of hedging our bets with a corresponding addition of $300,000 of one-time funds. So that can still kind of balance that risk, and we'll keep watching that. The second item highlighted is preventive maintenance, and we're proposing a $350,000 cut in preventive maintenance, or PM, because Adam Colloway and our FMB team have been more successful in our hiring and reducing our vacancy rates over the past few years, so we can rely less on the PM by the contract. On this slide, please note $665,000 reduction for the two proposed art reductions and the litter collection reduction, which we'll better explain it with maps in a few slides. And the last reduction I want to highlight is the right sizing of contractual support at Arlington Mill and Lubber Run garages. So the on-site contractual hours at Arlington Mill would drop from 48 hours per week to 8 hours per week, and at Lubber Run from 25 hours per week to 5 hours per week. We believe both of those garages can operate effectively and meet customer needs with reduced monitoring, given automation, door timers, relatively low utilization, the relatively small size of the garages, and the ability to call for remote support, which can then open the gates remotely. Our general fund budget also included additions in 3 targeted areas. The additional money needed for the new operations and maintenance facility, the $25K for one-time collective bargaining training to help smooth implementation of our SLT agreement. DES has most of the SLT, and the total cost is $50K. The utility fund would pay for the other half, the other $25K. And then that $300K of one-time for corrective maintenance, as I noted, to hedge our bets. On the revenue side, here are some of the more significant changes with details to follow. The household solid waste rate is a full cost recovery model. This graphic shows the puts and takes. The annual rate for homeowners would increase 9.61 cents this year, or just 2.4%. The modest increase in the refuse collection cost is inflationary, and the other cost drivers kind of nearly offset each other. The 961 proposed increase would bring our annual rate to $415.75, 2.4% increase. So if you look at the blue line on the bottom, you can see how we're still doing very well relative to our neighbors, and we actually provide a more comprehensive level of very quality services. Amazingly, we had those years keeping our rate nearly flat, even with the successful addition of yard waste and food waste. And then last year, we had to renegotiate refuse collection contract rates under an option year with our provider ADS. It was a 10-year-old contract, had artificially low processing, and so forth. Looking ahead, FY25 is the last option year on our ADS contract. So when we go to recompete that contract, we can expect some pricing increase that will then in turn impact the FY26 rates. So stay tuned. Similar to other fees we will discuss later, we're also trying to fairly charge for administration of commercial haulers permits, which last increased in 2018. And we are also proposing increases to our mulch delivery fees. So the cost of a 2.5 cubic yard half load would go from $60 to $78, and a full 5 cubic yard load would go from $75 to $93, which would then bring in an additional $50K of revenue. These are a much loved service. It's a tremendous bargain for our citizens. Private delivery of a full load, the lowest cost we can find is around $250, so it's less than half the cost. And importantly, it's part of that low carbon, really efficient loop in the county. And we really want our quality certified mulch products to go out locally, which short haul distances.
Yeah, we make the mulch.
We make the mulch.
Yeah.
So while we're talking solid waste, now is the time to discuss our proposed service reduction for litter collection. This program manages community cleanliness through litter collection, graffiti cleanup, and removing illegally dumped items. So eliminating this vacant litter collector will result in no dedicated staff for Zone 4, which is the light green zone in the center of the county, also where the county manager lives. To manage this reduction,
Does he litter a lot? Is that the allegation?
To manage this reduction, other litter collectors are going to rotate into Zone 4, or we may redraw the boundaries. So while it's hard to measure, there's logically going to be a correspondingly roughly 1/7 proportional reduction in cleanliness.
Sounds good. All right.
Ridership has continued to
Can I
recover.
just say real quick, so
Yeah.
with little breaks,
Sure.
anything anybody needs to know of this fact before we move into transit? We're okay to just keep moving? No red lights, go for it.
All right. So our ridership is continuing to recover steadily, but remains below those pre-pandemic levels given employment behavioral changes with telework. So on the left chart, the red line shows this year's ridership continuing to improve since last year. The bar chart on the right shows ridership year to date, and again, you can see that steady improvement or 15% increase compared to last year, but it's still about 75% of pre-pandemic. Our revenue budget is set at $3 million, based on the assumption of an 8% ridership increase and a 15% increase in art bus fares, which is where we were when we proposed the budget. And that's then multiplied by the current average fare collected. So, however, our intention is to raise art fares commensurate with whatever Metro adopts. And we have advertised a rate increase of up to 25% to give us that flexibility. Right now, WMATA is talking about increasing fares 12.5%, which would then increase our base fare from $2 to $2.25. And then the timing of the WMATA decision on the 25th of April, we may have to actually ask the board to adopt our art fare increase in May, depending on how late they go and how certain we are at adoption.
All right, however that works with the budget, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will. Keep going.
So our biggest add in our budget this year is the facilities operating expenses for the county's new art AOMF. Substantial completion is expected late this fall. And then we will begin the phased transition of maintenance from the Edsel Road location, which is leased, to the new location in Green Valley. It's phased because we don't have that luxury of stopping art maintenance or service. And just to manage expectations for the next year or so, because we added the electrification and solar components, and all those have long lead items, the permanent electric bus charging is tentatively set for late calendar year 25. We expect the first 4 buses to arrive sooner than that, and when they arrive, we will have temporary charging methods using the portable 50 kWh devices. The facility will have the capacity for up to 44 charging spaces. The initial infrastructure we're building at this time will support 12. So we've added $658,000 in the budget total, primarily for our Facilities Maintenance Bureau to maintain the new facilities. Everything from the cost of a building engineer to custodial and operations to paying the bills at that facility. TCF, again, is helping, and they'll fund about 30% of that cost. There are 3 solar arrays on this project. You can kind of see them graphically up there on the upper right. The garage has 159 kilowatt. We think the OMF roof is going to be about 50 kilowatt, and then the site canopy 188 kilowatt, totaling just shy of 400 at 397 kilowatt. We think that should generally be enough to power about half the load of the maintenance building, which is great for a multi-shift industrial facility. More transit. Given the need for savings, however, we accelerated the restructuring of the 53 and 61 as recommended in the recent TSP, but we just recommended the savings portion of that recommendation. The projected savings here are net tax support, net of revenue. So those routes have been underperforming for several years, below our service standard. So we will follow the data. In this proposed restructure, students at the Heights on Wilson will no longer be served by the 6153, but the impact is then minimized by the many other route options on Wilson. We've done a recent Title VI analysis indicating this is an acceptable approach. Overall, a key element to that is that we'll still venture into that Fort Myer, Radnor Heights area shown on the right side of the image, where the yellow kind of dips down there on the right side. W&L will lose service from Art 62, which is our next slide. But with this restructure, they will still have service at 30-minute intervals. Of course, the individual rider is going to vary given that it's been realigned. It may be more convenient or less convenient. On to the 62. We're proposing elimination of Art 62, given even lower ridership, which would then save $340,000 net of revenue. That would affect portions of lower density neighborhoods like Lyon Village, those along Lorcom Lane, Waverly Hills, but there would be that more direct service along North Quincy that would be available on the realigned 5361 or the Art 72 that runs on North Glebe. And this is another way to look at it, and it's a little hard to take in visually, but the image on the left shows in red the segments that are eliminated, and then the new route shown in gold. The image on the right shows the new route in gold, along with the existing routes in blue, to demonstrate that continued access to schools. All right, focusing back to ridership, we're seeing some very positive results. The Art Fare Fee program, launched by the NVTC grant, ran for several months recently and appears to correlate with about a 6% increase in ridership. And on our student fare fee programs, Art saw a nearly 50% increase from 22 to 23. The WMATA free ride for students is just getting started, but the data shows over 4,500 student trips just in January of this year. Parking revenue is yet another fascinating area to watch, given that it yields over $9 million in annual revenues. So in the proposed budget, we budgeted nearly flat revenues consistent with the data we're seeing 23 to 24 year to date. However, we also discovered through the performance parking data that many of our parkers were not paying. So we are sharing that more granular data with our enforcement personnel and PD. And if the board approves the 4 additional resources in PD for traffic safety and park enforcement, then we will just observe what happens with compliance changes, behaviors, and revenues. This is also a moment to mention that the first modest 50-cent midday performance parking price change will go into effect next Monday, the 18th, for about 550 spaces in the RB corridor, represents about 12% of the 4,500 spaces. It'll be from hours from 10 to 2. These next few slides review the recently completed permit fee review project. You'll hear more from Samir Bird in CPHD session on Thursday. So this was a real cross-departmental effort between DMF, CPHD, and DES to evaluate the permit fees we charge through the development process. So the approach was based on a cost recovery, where we gather estimates of staff time spent on the permit activities, plus the assumptions for overhead and indirect cost allocation. The scope included all those DES development fees shown in the colored boxes here, including the add-ons to the CPHD zoning fees, the schedule for planning. It includes over 60 types of positions and approximately 170 fees. There is a high level of detail required in that, but our scope did exclude the transportation right-of-way fees, because there it's not based on time and people, it's based on the cost, or it's not staff time, it's based on the cost of using our asset. For the DES fees, we are recommending the majority of them be set at the 100% cost recovery. However, the outcome of our analysis resulted in a wide range of impacts to our fees. We're recommending some fee increases, some decreases, and in some cases, elimination of the fees. That's all detailed in the board report. We're also recommending the addition of a 10% technology surcharge. That will actually generate $830,000, and that which is generated will go to the development fund to pay for the cost of permanent Arlington and other technology needs. We're recommending a 3-year implementation timeframe for several significant fee increases. So how does it all play out? For year 1, for the general fund, we'll have a modest $225,000 revenue increase. Year 1 for stormwater, we'll see a $260,000 decrease that's associated with our LDA fees. Of course, to the customer, the big impact, the big total picture is how's it going to change my project cost. So we did some comparison of known recent projects to illustrate the change effect. So on this slide, the first 3 examples are commercial multifamily projects, and the next slide will go into a little bit more detail on those. The last 2 examples on this slide illustrate kind of rough bookends on the range of single-family home projects. One is a really large rebuild, the other one's a smaller addition. However, in both of those, we'll see a decrease in DES LDA fees for '25. On the commercial projects, we are not currently recovering our costs. So if you look carefully at this and compare the second and third bullets on each of these 3 examples, in each case, just by cosmic forces, the recommended increase is $12,000. And so we'll gradually work over 3 years to cost recovery. What matters, of course, to the customer is the total fee increase as a portion of the project. And so to wrap up the impacts, this slide takes on 2 of the previous examples and layers on all fee and schedule changes between the departments. For the large residential project, the total fee increase is $3,500 or a 22% increase. In the second commercial example we picked out, it's a 19% increase or close to $160,000. On to equity. As DES continues our racial equity journey internally and in the services we deliver, so we look across the whole spectrum of services. And particularly then when we looked at the reductions, we try to minimize the impact to those most vulnerable. So that was a real foundational approach to our recommended art service restructure and reductions, especially the route reconfiguration into Fort Myer, Radnor Heights. On the solid waste reductions, we proposed incremental reductions, reducing but not eliminating things like shredding hours and litter zone efforts. And in DS, we are very fortunate to be able to avoid impacting any filled positions. So amidst the daily challenges and successes we look forward to, and these are the things that are most likely to drive future budgets. First, for vehicles and DES with the departments, the supply chain for new vehicles seems to be improving for the most part, but the acquisition prices keep rising. And for replacement parts and body shop jobs, well, we have delays and rising prices. So part of our carbon neutral transportation master plan coming out is all about right-sizing the fleet. Similar to vehicles, other manufactured goods, from transformers and electrical panels to solar panels and chargers, all those things are in high demand with corresponding delivery and cost impacts. So we have a lot to balance and require a lot of patience in delivery of our sustainability projects. Implementing our collective bargaining agreement properly and thoughtfully will take some time away from our work, but we will try to track that and watch any of the impacts. For our art contract, not only are we moving, but we need to negotiate our first option year soon, and it's too early to predict the pricing. So in addition to the move, we may have a new union also with TransDev in an already dynamic labor market. We're also trying over time to optimize the telework and space needs. This is kind of a riddle, and do it in a responsible manner while minimizing the near and long-term capital and operating expenses of working in a hybrid environment with lower daily occupancy. So this is another good break point. I don't know when you were considering, Madam Chair, to bring in C2E2, but this is.
I think this is a great break point, but if C2E2 is here, I think Ms. McIntyre, yeah, do you want to come? And then we'll take that, and then we'll see about board questions. Welcome.
Okay, good afternoon. For the record, I'm Joan McIntyre, speaking on behalf of Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission. Just based on kind of the overall review of the budget, we're just not really going to be convinced that it really is sufficiently addressing the climate crisis. In particular, we're taking really a holistic approach at the budget and expecting this kind of whole of government approach, looking at, how are the government operations and spending as reflected in the budget, accelerating the phase out of fossil fuels and moving Arlington towards its goal of carbon neutrality. The first issue that we really confront is actually transparency. What's really needed is a lot more clarity within the budget in terms of what kind of impact it's having on meeting these goals of reducing fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions. As a starting point, it would be extremely helpful to actually have an inventory of the energy profiles of the county facilities, what systems they're using, when they need to be replaced, energy efficiency, so that that can become basically a basis for providing a timeline for how you get those buildings to zero carbon neutrality in operations, and particularly as quickly as possible, phasing out the use of fossil gas in those buildings. Right now with the budget, they mentioned there's about 9 projects that are going to be underway, either in design or construction over the year, but with very few details. There's some mention of the Madison Center going to all-electric systems, but nothing about the other projects. So really, we need to see a lot more detail on what all the projects are underway and how are they advancing these goals for addressing the climate crisis. Similarly, with the vehicle fleet, they're making great progress clearly in terms of transitioning the sedan fleet. But what about the other fleets, and how are they looking in terms of making those transitions as well? I mean, those purchases are probably reflected throughout the budget. And so, kind of an inventory of what the vehicles are and what kinds of, when they need to replace, and where the opportunities are to make the transition. And with all of that, also need to take into account EV charging infrastructure, probably capacity issues related to, what Dominion can reply, but, kind of looking more broadly, but, starting with that inventory, and then here's all the other context that needs to be addressed in terms of meeting those things. The other issue on transparency is actually we need much better metrics in terms of measuring overall progress, both for county operations and broadly for community operations. Much more easily to do with county operations because we have much more understanding of what the information and data is. But just for one example is they report, greenhouse gas emissions on an annual kind of incremental decline, but that's not terribly helpful. What is much more helpful is, what's the total greenhouse gas emissions? And then where have we come from there, and where do we have to go to get to that carbon neutrality goal that we're trying to achieve? But I think, kind of looking throughout the budget, there's lots of data in there that just really doesn't tell you exactly what progress we're making on a lot of those issues. Now, with respect to the Climate Action Fund, I think maybe it's now time to really rethink what this fund is about. For starting points, $1 million in a year is nice. I'm not even going to get into the issue of whether it's sufficient. But the fact is that the initial tranche has been spent over 3 years. So, if you're spending this over 3 years, it's really not all that much. So if we're going to put $1 million in the budget, we should be expecting to spend $1 million in the budget. Furthermore, it's also thinking in terms of let's make these part of the line items of the budget, make them part of projects and efforts that would have some continuation so that there can be more long-term planning on how we address this issue. We're going to be living with it for decades, so we need to kind of have the infrastructure. One thing that, we have asked for and kind of called for is what kind of, and I'm talking about a one-stop shop for actually looking out, providing services, resources, information, incentives, and programs to help make the 96% of greenhouse gas that comes from the private sector move towards these same goals of carbon neutrality. So, that there's, these are all going to be made by decisions by individuals, but, right now they need, a lot of information, help just to kind of get understanding to how they can take advantage of IRA credits and rebates, what kinds of decisions they need to make in order to make these changes happen, and how they can actually benefit from them. So, kind of a whole, under an umbrella of a program within the CEP roadmap, they actually mention a few efforts that are outward-looking, like they call their energy ambassadors, the Green Homes Choice Program, which apparently is kind of not really operational anymore, and that they're looking to revamp that. But again, in both those areas, they've mentioned issues related to funding and staffing in order to kind of make those projects happen. So there are some ideas already out there that should be included, but again, and this is something that also becomes kind of an area to actually take advantage of the grants and the credits that are available through the federal IRA and other programs to make things in other kind of financing efforts. And one element to look at, and this is actually looking at workforce development, working with the businesses that would supply some of the goods and services to make sure that they have the skills they need, and also that they understand some of these issues. I hear, and I'm sure others have heard, cases where people have gone out, you have to replace their hot water heater, they have to replace their furnace, and the contractor turns to them and say, yeah, you should just stick with the gas system. It's a lot easier, it's too hard, you don't want to do it. Heat pumps don't work in our temperatures, things that really just aren't right. So, you need some kind of education really among the business community to make sure that they're in line with what we're looking for. So, and again, it's an opportunity of actually training workers to make sure that residents in Arlington will have access to good paying green jobs. And then within some of the other areas is, again, it looks like they're moving more towards on EV infrastructure. And again, it's good for the county to kind of set the pace, providing some, kind of kickstarting the development of this network. But, it's time, I think, and it sounds like they may be moving towards that, is actually, again, line item. This is what our goals are in terms of helping promote the development of the EV infrastructure. And here's where we're expecting to do funding for these projects overseas over the next course of, say, 5 years or so, as we move more towards electric vehicles. And similarly, some of the climate action funds have actually used to supplement funding for development projects, say for like the Madison Center and shifting to. We need to move away from that. I mean, they're treating this as an add-on. And it really is an add-on. This is an essential investment, and it should be part of the base price, and it should be considered as part of it and built into it. And again, if we're tracking it and making clear with kind of a good inventory and a good tracking of where we're moving on our buildings, that's kind of the way of tracking it. And again, they also need to take into account there is IRA funding that can cover some of the additional costs. And in most cases, you're actually going to get some savings over the long term. So, looking holistically at the impact of these types of investment can give you a different perspective. But, kind of treating them as a luxury, nice to have element, really just as a facet. And then finally, looking at transportation, I think, it's regrettable that they're cutting those. It's understandable given the low ridership on those, but I think it's also an indication that the county should start looking to actually rethinking some of its transit and how it can essentially and actually really literally meet people where they are. Reducing vehicle miles traveled is an essential part of meeting our carbon neutrality goals. It actually will help meet Vision Zero goals, and it'll have, impact some people's health and a lot of the other is moving through. So, given that this is a complex issue and will take kind of decades and probably some experimentals to explore, I would suggest actually doing a study that would produce some recommendations of how to move forward with some pilot projects that could, kind of rethink these efforts. In our letter on the transit strategic plan, we had mentioned that two ideas. One is looking at microtransit programs, and particularly ideal for these areas where they're actually cutting service is as a way of, small minivans of 20, 30 passengers to be much more flexible, more of an on-demand type service that actually then links into the rest of the transit network. So, helping people get to where they need to go, when they need to go there, and changing over the course of the day, over the course of the week as people's travel patterns change. So AI actually is probably something that can help an awful lot in this, because people are pretty predictable in terms of what their patterns are. And that's something. And then similarly, working with APS to, kind of assume some of or all of the transportation needs of the middle to high school students. This is a way of probably a good win-win between ART and the school system.
Thank you. How are you doing there? Okay, we're just about there.
And then
Good,
just
thank you.
a few final notes
Yeah,
very
that's fine.
quickly. Again, kind of mentioned APS. I do hope as you're meeting with your colleagues on the budget, speaking both in terms of the facilities and the transportation as to how you can work closely together. I know the county's working very closely with APS, but getting them to make sure that they're more or less following along the same lines that the county should be following in terms of getting to carbon neutrality is important. And there's a lot the county staff can and already does provide. Similarly, looking for strengthening partners across the region. This will be particularly important for things like green banks and community choice aggregation, is that we need to be kind of thinking forward of the funding needs for there and how we can kind of best make use of working together. Other areas, just again, as looking at the budget, is how is climate change being addressed and incorporating into planning and things like housing, economic development. There's lots of opportunities there, and certainly energy efficiency and energy costs are a key issue of housing affordability. So making sure that we're considering that. There's nothing in the budget about the second position under the Climate Coordinators Act, so would be useful to know whether that's actually going to be filled. I know they were kind of putting it off until the climate coordinator actually kind of had a better sense of his job, but having a vacant position is like having no position at all. I just wonder a little bit about the optics of eliminating the chief equity officer position. At the highest level. Again, climate change needs to address equity, so there should be a lot of synergy between kind of those two high-level positions in terms of making sure that we're really thinking systematically about both of those issues and how they're meeting the county's goals.
Thank you.
Then, just...
How are you doing, Ms. McIntyre? You're just about done?
Two more points.
Okay.
Sorry,
I mean, they're great points, but
I know.
Yeah.
Okay. But just one is we have the plastic bag fee that's bringing in about $350,000. That's way too much money in my mind, because that's way too many plastic bags, but would be useful noticing to make sure that money's actually being expended on new programs as opposed to basically funding existing programs. And then again, appreciate the support for funding for tree pruning and invasive removals, and expanding funding for VCE, all of which is extremely helpful for county goals.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you, thank you. Colleagues, questions? We only have a few more slides to go, but let's see what we have here before we delve into the next section. Who would like to go first? Ms. Cunningham, are you ready to go, or Susan? Go ahead.
Do you want to go topic by topic or just?
Just jump in, we'll see. If it gets
Okay.
too crazy, we'll corral it. I think we're fine.
All right, I'll start with transit. So recognizing we've been in a period of transit destruction and decline during COVID and a build back that we are still on that trajectory of, and then noting that you have seen a 50% increase in iRide participation, and I assume that's for those whose card was actually red, which I would guess is a pretty small percentage from my sampling of high schoolers. How confident are we that we're not cutting off our hand here in removing service to several of the high schools that we're just beginning to see increased participation? And to C2ET's point of ultimately, we can imagine a better coordinated transit system that supports all of our needs, including our school children. just bring us into that conversation a little bit and what we do if we get it wrong.
And maybe Lynn can come up and help me out with this as well. And maybe we can pull up the slide. Katie, we've got a backup slide that kind of covers how we're looking at the different schools in particular. I will say this, on a positive note, we did recently add the WMATA service, and that opens up a bunch of other additional opportunities at the same time that we're proposing taking away the 62, and then we're restructuring the 5361. Again, I think it's, as I mentioned in my comments, I think it's going to vary greatly by individual student. In some cases, they're going to have a more direct route if they get on the bus. In some cases, they're going to have a longer walk to get to a bus. But we believe that we actually do have pretty good coverage. If I really drilled down on this, talking with my staff, I think amongst the schools, the one that would probably the most effective would be Williamsburg Middle School. And Tyler and I were looking at that yesterday, and the route that remains, the walking, Google tells us it's a 14 or 15-minute walk or something to get to the route that remains. But you can see the other routes and how they're covered with the schools, even with this restructure and the taking away of the 62.
And I guess maybe just to dive another level down, one of the challenges with the WMATA routes as well as these proposed changes is that they tend to emphasize the east-west and really, really poorly deliver on north-south. And so if I'm a child at Williamsburg and I want to go to a Parks and Rec program at TJ, I can only do that if I have private transportation and vice versa. And I think that's not the direction we mean to be going as a community. And so recognizing that we have challenging budgets all the time, we have to balance, but I really want us to grapple with that. The getting to an equitable community means a connected community and connected all the way through, not just in certain parts of the county. And especially for our kids, because that's, 2:30 in the afternoon, the ability to run you down to TJ is not something that every family has, and it really differentiates what services you can access.
I would just, first of all, say that Greg responded very well to your question. And that's why we talked about and we looked at what other forms of transportation are in the vicinity of the schools that will not have the direct connection with the 6153 or 62. So there are lots of other services. As we went through the TSP, we do note that we made enhancements throughout the TSP with school services. So that's something that we can revisit and look at as well. Maybe we looked at making some of those enhancements in the later years, that maybe we can bring them up, but that also goes back to what funding we have to do that. And we work every month with APS and understanding the travel needs. So we're constantly in contact with them and looking at how we can make better the services. And we've always also made some changes already with adjusting some routes for bell times. We've seen some overcrowding in some situations where we've added buses. So we're doing that constantly because we know we have this big new wave of riders and great because we also need the riders on our buses.
Okay. More on transportation? Let's stay on, I think we will stay on the topic.
Just as
Yeah.
so for everybody's awareness, TSP means Transit Strategic Plan. So, we need to deal with acronyms. So there are two ways. First of all, during the TSP, the Transit Strategic Plan, this was specifically the area for which your department was envisioning a microtransit pilot, right? More or less? It was exactly the situation where there is it's really below any defendable limit that we don't have the ridership, and so this is the moment where we say we want to try something new, and this would be a microtransit pilot.
We were looking at microtransit specifically in the areas where we had low productivity.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like this. And so where is that?
Well, we've applied for funding from, with DRPT in hopes that we will get it. It'll be approved, and that we plan to do a study on microtransit so we can move forward and see where we can actually put it where it makes sense to have that service within the county.
It's second way to do that, to address the mobility needs of students that are now, coming in, is to provide service at certain hours and for certain type of, a more limited service, but dedicated to serving the school or being, like we do, for example, with additional service to Kenmore or so. 75 is so is that an option?
We're actually doing that. That's what I mentioned. We've added additional services at bell
Would this
times.
be here an option?
At specifically where, I'm sorry?
On the 61?
On the 61, I don't know. That's something to look at, but we already know that we have other services that are in the area. And so we'll see how that works. But at this time, we had not planned to put additional service in, but we note that there's lots of other services, lots of other routes that are near and vicinity to those schools.
I will follow up on this because, we have alternatives and we can, maybe check on a few innovative solutions here. Thanks.
I would simply add that we totally understand the board's intent here. And when we find ourselves in a situation of budget execution, even if we haven't, anticipated or budgeted that, as long as we've got the buses and we see the demand, if that demand is there, we'll find a way to make it happen as long as our contractor can deliver. So we don't wait till the next budget year. We've been very responsive in our collaboration and working with schools. We meet with them every other week, and these issues are openly addressed and acted upon if the demand is there.
True, I can attest to that.
All right, great. More questions on transportation? Yes.
Yeah.
Susan.
So on ridership, it's all good. On ridership recovery, obviously we're not the only transit system in the region. How has our improvement over time compared to WMATA and to other jurisdictions that are nearby us?
It's very, very similar. One thing I'll say about the ART ridership, it did not drop as dramatically as the other services did. I can't tell you why that happened, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so we're showing that the ridership is improving just like others are in the region. So I'm very hopeful that we're on a trend even this year that we're going to be very, very close to getting back to pre-pandemic. Fingers crossed by everyone.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
And I know from WMATA's statistics that they're seeing actually return to pre-COVID on weekend service and kind of the non-traditional service. Is that pattern being reflected in ART as well? Basically that people are going back to transit, but they're going back at different times and places?
Yes, that is very true. And that's why with our Transit Strategic Plan, the TSP, that we focused on increasing weekend service, evening service, increasing the frequencies, and specifically looking at places and times of day that people are really moving to and moving toward. So that was carried out throughout the entire TSP.
Great, that's awesome to hear. And it sounds like in terms of those within-year adjustments, you're also going to be able to continue to moderate and do some of those changes if we see over the course of the next year, something has changed or people are using it in a way we didn't intend. I anticipate we'll be able to react there.
Absolutely. It is a plan.
Yeah.
So that means that's what we thought at this particular given time. But if we see different trends happening, then we could adjust.
Yeah. And then I think I have one last question that's
on transportation. Go for
union contractor related. Obviously, we've seen the last few weeks Fairfax has not been served well by their contractor and the contractor's relationship with the union. As we anticipate this first option year, are we at risk of a similar situation? What are we doing to mitigate and make sure that we are supporting our union members, but also supporting our service to our residents?
Yeah, I'll jump in and then I'll let Lynn finish off. Right now, we're in kind of a lull period between unions for our contractor. So we don't know what they're going to do until they do it. And then it's really, given the nature of the contract, it's used to be First Transit, now TransDev's problem or issue to deal with. But as we negotiate, we will certainly look at the terms of our contract to try to minimize that risk as much as we can. But we have to go with our existing contract.
Right.
I would say exactly the same thing, that we have a third-party contractor that's responsible for our services, and they are responsible for bringing the people to the table. And so we want to make sure that we have those who provide the service, that they're providing enough people and actually to carry out the services for us. So we watched very closely what was happening in Fairfax, and so we're going to be working hand in hand and making sure that, hoping that we are not impacted by whatever happens between them and their union.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it on
Okay,
transit.
thank you. Yep,
Yeah.
Matt.
A couple of transportation-related questions. I could use a reminder. We have a program similar to the LIFT program, is that right, for Metro, right? Their low-income residents do not have to pay, is that correct?
We do. We started a low-income pilot about 2 years ago, where we actually provided smart trip cards to SNAP recipients. We worked very, very closely with DHS, and $150 is given to those who are on the low income in the SNAP program, SNAP and TANF. One is for individuals, the other is for families.
Yep.
And that's something that's very similar to what Metro is doing now, specifically for those who receive SNAP benefits.
Great, thank you. And then I'd like to follow up. I think it's probably available, but the number of riders per hour on the 72, I'd love to learn. Just because I think it was part of the future pilot, some parts of the 72, but I could be incorrect. And I want to just see what the ridership is on that line.
Okay, we could probably get that for you. Are you saying the microtransit pilot?
Microtransit is what I meant. I could
In
be
that
incorrect.
area, yes. I don't know that we specifically called out that particular route. We were looking more so for areas,
The 53.
part of the county.
Okay, well, certainly the efficiencies of very low ridership, I'm open to the suggestions in the budget. Those are my transportation questions.
All right, thank you. I've asked this question before, I can't remember the answer. Have we considered circulators? Like for that north, circulate, like Glebe Road and George Mason, something bus just kind of, so there's a bus that everybody knows there's something coming in 10 minutes and it goes up and down. Have we considered doing that? I know some places circulators work well, but.
We don't have that right now, but we have noted in the strategic plan where there are areas that we would have something similar to that. I don't think that we would call them circulators because the shorter the route, in order to keep up with the frequency of the route, you have to put more buses out.
Right, no, I understand.
So you
that,
have to balance that.
Right.
But that's something, we're looking at areas in which we see there is great ridership demand.
Yeah, because between Glebe and George Mason, we connect most of the high schools, most of them pretty effectively. Questions now? Anything more on transportation? I'm sort of hoping not. We'll move on to the next subject.
Well, I have
Yes?
questions in this bunch of slides.
Yes,
but I
yes,
can-
yes. No, that's what I mean. Yep.
Slide 32, and it's regarding, first, ART Phase 2 is a capital improvement plan investment, is that right? Because Phase 1 is covered, as mentioned in slide 32, and I am under the impression that we need to do more capital investment to increase the number from 12 BEB buses that we can service to a larger number. So it is a capital improvement plan. Okay, great. And then related to that, on this slide, the budget breakdown, the 658K is for the new OMF, not the facility down in Alexandria.
That's correct.
Okay. Great. I might have one more question, but I want to yield.
Okay, all right. Susan, back to you. You just had,
I had a question on the solid waste fees. So it looks like our total cost for the Solid Waste Bureau is around 18 million, and our revenue is closer to 15 million. Will we be closing that gap over time, or does that represent something that I'm missing?
It's a full cost recovery program, so the revenue actually equals the budget for that program. So if you can reference where you're looking in the budget, the Solid Waste Bureau has other services they do provide that are broader than our residential base, so are not full cost recovery by that fee. If that makes sense.
And so are they cost recovery through some other set of fees too?
There is some general fund support for Solid Waste Bureau, but we do have other fees like the mulch fee and the hauler fee that do offset some of their costs. And of course, we're raising some of those this year to make sure they're full cost recovery. But we do have a model for household solid waste rate where we account for all the people, percentage of time that people spend for our residential program and make sure that we're setting that fee to be full cost recovery.
So like the roughly 3 million that's outside of that from the deep at the budget, I'll find you the page number, but is that commercial support? Is it schools support? What are the big categories there that would be outside of
We have
residential?
our recycling center as part of that.
I see Greg Grabowski coming up because I bet he knows the answer. I would
friend.
make a guess, but I'll see what you got.
I think the programs you're
You're going to have to push your button. Yeah, there you go.
I think the programs you're referring to are litter collection broadly is basically coming from the general fund. Also street can collection. So the street cans you see throughout the county, that's one of those other programs. And then there is some drop-off center, which is basically pulled out of the general fund.
Great.
Does that answer your question? So can I jump in and while you're here? I didn't find, I was looking for it, but I didn't have a lot of time to look carefully. Is there something that shows how we're doing with, say, recycling? Because at one point, we were actually making money on recycling, and I know that's changed, and it keeps moving. Do we have that information somewhere? We had some nice graphs one year, I think.
We can provide that, but we are currently paying around $65 a ton. It's basically markets driven. We are paying a much higher rate to actually process the material, and then there's basically, we get some money back based on the revenue, based on the commodity values. But again, the most recent MRF contract really jacked up the rates from 70 to about $145 a ton for processing. And then we do get the rebate, but our overall net, we're paying about $65 a ton for recycling currently.
And do we make anything like on glass?
So we are basically glasses, we are selling for about $15 a ton. They actually come and get it and take it back to a glass processing facility in Pennsylvania. It's good now that they're actually recycling the glasses. Before they were using it for daily cover in the landfill, but we are getting $15 a ton in value for glass.
That's great. And remind me how Covanta works, because we produce energy at Covanta, right?
So Covanta does generally produce about 18 kilowatts of power a year. Right now, we're paying about $43.76 per ton for material brought there. In October 1st of 2025, that rate goes down to zero. And as Greg indicated before, at some point, we are going to have a new residential contract, and hopefully that cost will offset some of the increases associated with that new contract.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I'd just be interested at some point on knowing how that all trades. I know it does keep moving. Thank you. Susan, you finished with your second? Yep, okay. Matt? Recycling, trash?
Not recycling or trash, so.
All right, we see anybody else?
Not on,
On solid waste?
Yep,
Oh,
solid waste.
go ahead.
if you have solid waste, then you should.
I have something that has to do with solid waste. So organics recycling is now slated to reach multifamily. So that's something that.
So let me
is starting.
clarify. So this is a pilot.
Takas and I actually had a sneak preview of this at the FUA thing. You're being careful here, Takas, because it looked cool, didn't it?
It absolutely looks cool. And what's cooler is that so many people are waiting for it.
And they were so excited to hear about it. It was really, yeah.
So we are using some of the litter grant monies to basically pilot 5 to 7 locations where we will set out 2 of these smart on-street composting containers. We want to make sure that if one fills up, there's still some flexibility so people aren't turned off by the program by walking up and saying you can't use it. So we are intentionally deploying them in pairs. They are very smart. You need to basically use your phone to access them. They will indicate to us their fullness level so we can actually monitor them remotely. The litter staff will actually be collecting and switching out the internal containers and bringing that material back to our earth products recycling yard, where we'll actually put that material in our in-vessel composter. So again, we'll be able to use that material for our parks and other people to utilize. But we are excited about it. Again, this is part of the broader solid waste management plan, which talks about comprehensive organics management about 5 years from now. So we're just looking at different opportunities and options for the multifamily to participate. So that's really what we're trying to pilot here.
Could I put in a plug for Fairlington? I don't know if that's one of your places, but we don't do compost, and there are a lot of people, and they would if we could. I'm just saying.
I'm sorry to say, but you're not one of our 5 sites.
It's not
but
one
we
of the
can-
5 sites. All right. I'll have to come and, lobby for it next year. I'll bring all my Fairlington people. We'll wear shirts. We'll be good.
Trade Center is just around the corner.
This
and
is
they
true.
have
It's the
so
bottom of the
many
hill.
nice bins.
And a lot of Fairlingtonians come down
Yes,
and
they do.
drop their food off.
Yes, it can be a little hard in the car. Okay, sorry, I digress. New subject? Maureen, you want to go ahead?
Sure.
Sure. I have performance parking comments and questions. One, I think that this is so exciting, and what we've learned so far. I mean, we're so short into it, and we know so much more than we did before we did this. And not to kind of get ahead of ourselves, but given how insightful and impactful this has been, are we thinking of at all expanding this beyond the 2 corridors that we've already installed the sensors in? Are we playing a wait and see game? I mean, I'm just thinking about not only in terms of the metering and the fees, but actually like the service delivery and the open source information we've been able to provide. I've already downloaded one of the apps that shows where parking is available, but also now I see that Park Mobile has added a layer that you can see exactly where parking is, and I've showed it, everyone I have showed it to has been like, this is amazing. Right. And I think it's a huge benefit to people as they go about their lives to be able to have this information. But I also think people are going to, especially once they get used to it in one place in the county, very quickly want it other places. So what is our thinking there is the gist of that question.
I think we may have to get back to you on that one. We do appreciate well, Dan's got some ideas up his sleeve already, it sounds like. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. Well, that's a good question. So we just really are starting, next Monday, the whole price change, the first price change. So we have a couple of years to analyze the data, and we'll do the quarterly price changes. And then I think in that course of those 2 years, we'll kind of make a recommendation. Do we expand it? Is it something that lives on beyond the project cycle? So I don't think, this is very early on, and we're excited to get the data. I think the data is really showing us a lot of interesting things. But in terms of the longevity of the project, we have to see how the data goes, and we'll make decisions in the next couple of years.
But if there's a clamor for it, maybe we could do
We do
something
appreciate the
about that.
advanced enthusiasm.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, if people really, anyway, we'll see.
We're learning a lot, that's for sure.
Yeah,
are,
it's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, for one, that they really want it. This is great. How excited it is, yeah. Anything else?
That's it on that topic.
Okay, all right. We're up against the time a little bit. I did get a note reminding me, but I think we'll probably go a little over 5, if that's all right. Anything more subject areas, more?
C2E2 related, so we can do the next, and I can ask it at the end.
No, go now, that's fine.
Okay, all right. So the question is a little, perhaps for the manager, it's regarding, and Mr. Manuel, you, Greg, as well, as big, bold swings at the environment, and keeping in mind that it's hard to do that. And so I'm not re-grinding. I'm trying to sort of think of areas where I think there could be opportunities. One is Barcroft, and whether we could invest more to try and reach a higher environmental standard there. I'm sort of thinking of Ms. McIntyre's various comments. The other big one in my mind is educating homeowners about what they can do. There's a big article in part about also resiliency in the last few days in the Post, and the need to get more people off the grid, candidly, because the grid is struggling. And so, are those 2 areas that we could consider? I can almost envision a 5-minute video being pushed to every person through social media, we'd have to figure that out, to homeowners in the county to encourage folks to adopt. And so those are kind of two questions, or if there are any other ideas about big swings on working on climate.
I think the manager might be ready
I would like
do
to
that.
add one thing, because I know I've been in conversations with the chair on this. There is funding in the budget for what had been promised as an RFP to come out over the last month or so, but it's close to coming. It's coming to deal with this idea of providing funding for a potential for a nonprofit to work with members of our community to deal with the kind of resiliency you're exactly talking about, and which I know the chair of the county board is personally going through a process right now
Yeah,
of
we
trying.
failed on the first chart.
Yeah,
We're going to get there.
so there is absolutely, that is something that is included in what we're doing. And I'll let Greg take a shot at the other part of that.
Yeah, and I might ask Demetra to come and tell me what I missed in my thoughts. But on the big swings, at Barcroft, we are completely engaged with that project and seeing what can be done. One of the exciting things that we're doing with the various federal funds out there available is basically leaving no stone unturned and pursuing every possible grant imaginable. Demetra and her team are doing a very aggressive job applying, and we just can't totally predict which ones we're going to hit pay dirt on and at what levels, but we are definitely taking some big swings and various grant applications, hoping to leverage that which is out there and then not put further strain on this budget. So absolutely, we're out there. And then education, yes, we can pursue that. Demetra, I'll turn it over to you to embellish.
I apologize. I was taking a comfort break. Can someone just update me on the question?
I'm sorry.
Barcroft is the subject. What are we doing? Could
The
we do it?
question was what we're doing at Barcroft, and then the other question was what might we do for educating homeowners on the opportunities and things they should be pursuing to adapt their homes and so forth for climate resilience.
Okay, assuming those are two different questions, and in the interest of time, I'll try and be concise. We started out our work with Barcroft, along with AED and Gyre Lynch, with the NREL Laboratory, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, on a technical partnership that really went in and looked at symbolic buildings in that community and really profiled them for their different construction, age, use, type. The energy efficiencies in those buildings are going to be different than more current buildings. As far as education, we are looking to do education, but we were trying to do something that would be multi-jurisdictional and really cover northern, or at least part of northern Virginia, through the federal grants. That has proved very challenging. I want people to put the federal grants into perspective. There is, with the Infrastructure Act and the IRA, over 10 years, $1.7 trillion possible. However, a majority of that is for infrastructure at a level that excludes local governments. It is for Indian reservations and native lands, and it is for decidedly large, underserved populations in jurisdictions where the population is represented by at least 50%. We have gone after a number of direct, we really scrutinize them to go after direct applications. We are part of the COG effort for the CPRG. We are waiting to hear from the federal government on the overarching awards on the green banks. Simultaneously, we're working on updating the CPACE ordinance and program. We are working with Virginia DEQ and DOE on programs that are going to be administered at the state level and roll down. And we're continuing to look for direct grants that we can do. There's also grants that we're working with Transportation and the Equipment Bureau, both for us and APS on clean school buses. The CPRG, I can say right now, the application was just kind of baked this morning. The COG, CPRG, is going to go after buildings, LIDAC, and non-LIDAC buildings. The state CPRG is going to go for electric charging infrastructure and electric vehicles. So we're hoping to leverage, but all of these things are really rolling out quite slowly. We have to understand, too, that the federal government is trying to get an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of opportunities and programs out the door very quickly with very, very little staff. And we found that there are great delays in rolling out the programs.
Thank
right.
you. That's very comprehensive
Okay.
and mindful that the federal grants are worth all pursuing and that we may not be the first locality that some federal grants are likely to be. We may not be at the top of the list, but thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, Taka says he's got a really quick question, and then we will move on.
Just very quick. Just to say, I mean, this is the slide 39 is about the fees, the permit fees. To me, this is a lot. You don't need to answer that right now. I think I need to understand better why we are levying or want to levy 10% more for automated processing, how Permit Arlington is performing. To be very honest with you, I hear a lot of complaints about our fee, how fast and how flexible and responsive our permit fees are processed. Our permits are processed. I think some of the many of the complaints have a core of truth, and I would like to follow up with you because it's also from many other points of view. This is a moment where we touch the customer, those who build and those who improve, and if we want to make great improvements. This is a point where we should be looking at how to make it easier, not more difficult or more expensive, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tyler, did you want to say something?
I can comment on the tech fee just briefly. CPHD fees already incorporate a 10% technology surcharge. The DES fees historically have not. So this sort of brings us on par with them and helps us contribute the DES portion of what we should be paying to help maintain Acela and also for the future of that system as we look, to maintaining that in the future.
I believe that no practitioner would have a problem with that as long as the service is.
So we need some
commensurate.
performance measures perhaps on this, a few more on the service. All right, I think we better move on to stormwater management, and we will go past 5, but hopefully not a whole lot.
All right.
Greg.
Thank you. All right, so FY25 is the first full budget year with the stormwater utility. The board was set by, the rate was set by the board this past December. So there's an 8% operating increase, which is driven by a combination of debt service to support the capital program, compensation, contractual increases, increased indirect and overhead, and new cost to upkeep with the recently acquired properties and the new cost of that utility administration. Plus, there were a few expense transfers from the general fund, including bike lane sweeping and other personnel chargebacks. So for the stormwater program, we had 2 additions to the proposed budget. For the LDA program, we added 1 additional FTE and contractual funding support for the post-construction compliance program. So if you look on that chart on the left, cumulatively, there are over 6,200 private stormwater management facilities, and that number grows about 600 facilities annually. That's all for compliance to keep the inspection and maintenance schedules going. The other add for the budget is an allowance for charging staff time for monitoring and managing everything from the mowing and the neighbors on and adjacent to the overland relief properties. While we've only acquired 6 properties right now, they all have neighbors. We want to be a great neighbor, and it will grow, and we want to track those costs properly.
Okay.
Utility fee structure included 3 customer classes: single-family, multifamily, and non-residential. We went over this in detail with the board over the past years. We've added in the impacts to each of the customer classes based on the adopted $258 per ERU rate. Over 80% of the single-family property owners will pay 1 ERU or less. So all of this was very skillfully covered by Tyler Smith and Krista Abel in the previous board sessions. The only update for the board today is that we are now on track for the first bills coming in May.
Great. Might not have been with this total board, but that's great. It was great. Next.
So here's our regional comparison for the stormwater fee. Since we've settled with back in December, other people have proposed. Only Fairfax County is not charging for its program under utility fee. Arlington is the green line here. And for the typical homeowner, because of the openly discussed burden shift, we've now taken that leap to kind of middle of the pack. But by a small margin, we're still the lowest inside the Beltway.
Okay.
Regionally, the jurisdictions are all increasing their rates about a rate of 5 to 6% annually. Our future slope, of course, will largely be driven by our capital program execution. And since we have two new board members that weren't involved in the entire journey, we wanted to give a quick status update. The project has been ongoing since spring of 2020 and took a lot of hard work to get to this point. So the credit application has been a topic of discussion lately. That application period opened on 1 November. Originally, this was supposed to close on 15 January. However, we extended till the end of January in response to some customers' questions and because it was kind of awkward timing with the assessment notices. Our very capable credit program manager, Steve Scouron, is wrapping up his review of those applications now in time for accurate bills that go out in May. Since there has been a lot of interest in that first round credit program, we thought it would be good to share some stats amongst the 67,000 plus properties. So, a credit program is required by the state code. We modeled the best of others' experiences and it's meant as a thank you. So participation was relatively light, as expected. We ended up with about 977 applications, which is about 4% of the properties. As of last week, about 27% have been approved, 15% are still in review, 14% withdrew, and 44% were denied for a wide range of reasons, including in some cases, they were already getting the credit automatically because I did an LDA with their BMPs, and they didn't know that. So in any case, though, we are taking feedback. We're looking at ways to improve the credit program, the credit manual, and the customer experience in the process. So we're developing an interactive tool so people can better understand up front whether they qualify. And hopefully that should save some time for both citizens and the staff. Move on to the utilities fund. Overall, the proposed expense budget increases to $102 million, an increase of $6 million or 6% from the prior year. So as I mentioned, in the general fund section, there were some cuts taken in the form of transfers, 1 FTE transfers from the general fund, along with other adjustments to properly align the staff and programs. And then that $25K one time for collective bargaining training. The transfer out was a big change, driven by less transfer to auto fund with fewer purchase of heavy equipment and EV upgrades this year. The need is always very spiky. Now, the astute looking carefully at this may note that the revenues are more than the expenses, and that is to achieve the 90-day operating reserve, which also then goes up with the budget. Additionally, based on the flat year-to-date trends for water consumption and thus revenues, we are anticipating revenues coming up short for the current year, creating a gap. Next slide. The bottom line up front, we're proposing a 4.9% rate increase overall. That has an impact of 4.8% or $38 annually to the median household. Some of those big cost drivers and rate pressures include existing and new debt service, pay, water purchase, and cost increases for chemicals and electricity. In FY24, we're also issuing the debt that we deferred from last year, and then that'll still be along with the planned debt for this year, which are both for the aqueduct, so that all that debt service will hit in '25. So to mitigate the rate increase in this environment that we have flat water consumption, we did the following. We tried to keep the non-personnel budget as flat as possible. We adjusted the funding mix and strategies for the capital program, and then we added an implementation adjustment in the CIP to recognize some of the execution delays we've seen. So collectively, these helped us lower the necessary pay-go contribution funded from rate revenues. Here's the household comparison chart showing our competitiveness regionally. Again, we're in the green line there, middle of the pack, and only Falls Church is lower inside the Beltway. But they have not yet proposed rates. So regionally, most utilities are increasing their rates anywhere from 3 to 9%. And I will say that this is an area we are very happy to be below average on the rate increases. However, looking ahead, we do see some rate pressures. On the operating side, we expect to continue to feel rate pressures related to employee compensation and chemical costs. As we implement the CIP, we'll start to see the operating costs for some of those projects namely the advanced metering infrastructure and then the Regen suite of projects. Regen will include some revenue opportunities from the biogas production and reduce expenditures related to some of the chemicals and hauling, but there will be increased energy consumption with the new processes at the plant. So we'll see how those all balance off. Finally, we anticipate continued rate pressures due to the aqueduct's growing budget. They are also feeling the same pay issues and chemical pressures that everyone else is facing regionally. However, that capital reinvestment at the aqueduct is really critical for our water reliability and quality, but it will add for our costs for purchased water.
Thank you. I'm going to try to see if there are any questions here, because I suspect the end may not have as many questions as our utilities. But colleagues, any questions you'd like to ask so far on water or utilities? Okay. I have real quick, remind me, the aqueduct, who runs that? Do we sit on a board somehow and help?
I sit on, represent the manager on the customer board.
Excellent.
The customer board.
Thank you. Douglas, you had a quick question? No. Good. Let's go. Thank you.
All right, moving on to the Boston Garage. The Boston Garage operates on 2 separate financial entities, floors 1 through 7, and then the 8th floor with the capsizeplex. So for 1 to 7, with the post-pandemic telework and mall vacancies, those continue to have an impact on revenue as monthly and the daily parkers are down. In FY23, we saw a 34% increase in revenue, which is great, but expenses are still higher than revenues. Pre-pandemic, our revenue was running at $4.2 million. So given that our budgeted revenue is still 35% lower than that, we may need to use the fund's economic stability reserve to fund the garage operations or curtail certain expenses. We have fully funded our contractor at the garage, but as people leave, we will reduce the funding. On the 8th floor, we went into the pandemic with a much better financial position, and the revenue drop was less dramatic because Iceplex maintained most of their operations. Last fall, we made major operational improvements of the garage. We replaced the obsolete gate and pay stations with a new gate list and tick list system to improve that parking experience for our customers. It uses the license plate reader technology, which significantly reduces delay to enter and exit the garage. We offer multiple payment options, eliminate the paper tickets. All that allows our operational team to focus on the customer experience and enforcement rather than the mechanical system failures at the gates. So we did hear some customers having troubles inside the garage given the cell phone reception inside that large concrete mass. So in February, we installed repeaters that significantly help improve cell phone access. We also added some additional signage to help our customers navigate the system. Moving into the auto fund. Year to year, it varies depending on what's due for replacement and how much it costs. This year, the replacements are lower, which is driving the change in our budget. As I mentioned very early on, we are continuing to experience inflation pressure for heavy equipment. Just as a data point, a medium dump truck back in to configure to fight snow in 2012 cost around $100,000. Now it costs $220,000.
Ouch.
Yeah. We also looked at budget savings in the auto fund, and we identified 2 current vacancies that we believe we can do without. We're proposing to continue to freeze a night shift supervisor. We froze that position last year. We've reorganized, and so far that new model is working. We're proposing a freeze, however, so that we can retain that flexibility as our fleet needs change, and as we move to electric, we're not sure how that plays out over time. We're also proposing eliminating a previously frozen vacant welder position. That body of work has become much more specialized and less frequent, so we've been able to contract out that work. Our equipment bureau team, this is my last slide. We're coming home.
It's not even 5. We actually might make it. I'm going to be impressed. Thank you, Greg.
We got a great equipment bureau team. They're working really aggressively with staff in the facilities and the air team to meet the board's direction to replace the vehicles where feasible with electric. So to accomplish this, $410,000 this year and additional one-time funds are proposed to cover that incremental cost to convert to EVs. We're also concurrently pursuing grant funding, which may reduce the one-time need. We got to stay tuned how that goes. So if you look at the right side there on that graph, it shows our projected progress on converting our non-public safety fleet to electric. Once our FY25 orders have arrived, we should be around 76 electric sedans in our non-public safety fleet, which represents 61% of that set of 124. We also have 3 BEB school buses, and we submitted an EPA grant to purchase an additional 5. Our whole team has been really aggressive on EV conversions as the market opportunities present. And that image on the lower right there of a police vehicle signals that even public safety is getting in the mix. Their coordinator is really, really positive on this, and we are planning to purchase a pursuit-rated EV Blazer as a pilot. And just last week, we had our first meeting to figure out how we can make public safety take-home EVs work, because that's A, a lot of vehicles, and B, we believe that refueling with power at home will likely mean more costly and more mission effective than charging at work. So, we're already at work, we're already charged with parking, electrical capacity issues and parking and so forth. So there's a lot of detail that will go into that. And we had our initial meeting last week, and we are meeting with Chief Penn and his team this Thursday afternoon. That concludes my briefing.
Excellent. Thank you. Questions, colleagues? Comments?
Just one?
Matt?
Thank you, Chair Libby. We're getting, so, one Blazer is what we're purchasing, is that right?
I'm going to ask Chris to come out and tell me more details. Chris Allison is our Equipment Bureau Chief.
Yep.
Captain Scott Linder in the PD is the guy he's teamed up with to do a lot of this.
No. You probably have to explain pursuit rated, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and pursuit rated, as I understand it, is like an upfitting is required.
So pursuit rated vehicles, actually rated by the manufacturers themselves, which is pretty interesting. But it's mainly for performance-related components like brakes, suspension, tires, that kind of thing. An interesting component that is not part of the pursuit equation is ballistic door panels. We will have to add ballistic door panels to this new Blazer, but it's going to be the thing, and we're pretty excited.
Thank you. So, pilot, walk before you run, and panels adding, and you always give a very detailed, when we ask a detailed analysis of what's cost effective. I'm interested in how this can be exciting to our teams. And so that includes charging at home, because we have heard as recently as this week about take-home vehicles. And I'd be much more interested if it were electric vehicles. So I'm not saying change the pilot, but next year, let's make this exciting to our public safety if we can.
Just we already have, Chris will remember the numbers, PD and fire already have a number of EVs. With those EVs, we're going to choose some people to pilot a concept to have them charge at home, and then we would reimburse them in a fair and appropriate auditable manner.
Great.
Yet, not make it so complicated we can't get it done. So that's our quest.
I think the part that I wanted to comment on that excites me is when you look at an EV versus an ICE comparison, you have to look at the vehicle, the size of the battery, the efficiency of the battery, the range that the battery gets on X number of kilowatts of power. And at a rate of, call it 10 cents a kilowatt versus gasoline at maybe $3 a gallon, which is fairly realistic right now, at 10,000 miles per year, which is pretty realistic for a take-home in PD, you're picking up $1,500 to $1,800 a year just in fuel savings. And so that's all theory, and I just want to see it pan out. And we'll be able to tell you probably a year from now.
Great.
I was just about 5 days ago, I was laughed at because I suggested that the police department should, not by county staff, by resident. So I said, no, actually they are very fast. They are wickedly fast. They have very often the ICE, the internal combustion engine, has to run all the time. So in order to be, and this vehicle doesn't have to. and it's a very comfortable and also low maintenance and all the above. It's of course a higher price purchase, significantly higher, probably twice or no, at least, I don't know, 50% higher.
Well, by the end of FY '25, we'll have 149 of these things. And from being part of every purchase, I can tell you that some of them, the Delta, for instance, a Ford F-150 versus the new Lightning, it's about $7,200 difference. The Nissan Leaf is about $10,000. The E-Transits, the vans, which are wonderful for Arlington, they're up probably $12,000, $14,000. And what I've found so far is the grants, the CMAQ grant and the IRA grant, they do the comparison, and you have to prove which vehicle you're not buying and which one you are buying. But we're applying for up to $7,500 per vehicle in those grants. It's no secret that I'm not great at public speaking, and in the past I've sat up here and shake, but I could talk to you for hours about EVs. and you mentioned PD, the pickup truck, the Ford Lightning, I invite them over to drive them. They're like, yeah, it's okay. I get them in the Lightning, now they all want Lightnings.
Yeah.
Right. They are incredibly fast. They're smooth, powerful, and great on the highway.
I could see how we might go past 5 o'clock. Great, but it sounds like a great invitation. I suspect some board members may want to take you up on that. We'll see. Susan, yes.
Don't leave yet. We're still one more question. Because we all love EVs. Back on the take-home cars for all of our public safety folks, maybe two questions. One is, do we calculate our commute costs and sort of greenhouse gas commute of our own employees? Do we have that for public safety? Because they tend to have larger vehicles going very far.
So we track where they live, and of course, the round-trip mileage. I will state that having been on many a panel or committee to look into take-homes and can we reduce them or eliminate them, let's be honest, it's basically a benefit of public safety. Mm-hmm. So we haven't spent a lot of time trying to calculate that, but we can. It's fairly easy.
So I'm actually asking the question of those who don't have the take-home cars, which is some of our public safety members, their own personal commute costs are high, both in greenhouse gas emissions and in dollars. And at least anecdotally, and speaking with several of them in the sheriff's office and police team, they would be willing to drive a Leaf or willing to drive certainly a F-150. But do we have any flexibility or grant pilot opportunities to provide take-home cars that are not necessarily the pursuit ready cars, that are cheaper, that are parked overnight here anyway?
If I understand the question correctly, it really raises the question of what can I buy, what's out there, and then what I can buy, does it meet the mission of the agency? Mm-hmm. And we started out, our first electric vehicle was a Volt back in 2011. Then we started picking up the Nissan Leafs in 2017. And we've got like 60 or 70 Nissan Leafs, and lots of times it's Chris Allison saying, here's your new electric vehicle, and the agency going, but it's kind of small. I'm like, well, that's what you get. Mm-hmm. With public safety, you have to say, okay, the mission, we want them on the wall, we need them on the wall. They can't drive around in a Nissan Leaf. We have the PSAs, the public service aides. We have the non-uniformed fire marshals. They're driving the Leafs. But we just picked up today from Sheehy the first Mach-E for the Sheriff's Department. And you talk about a ride, it's a ride. And they love it. So we're getting individuals in public safety that are excited, but we have to keep them in vehicles that will keep them excited and meet their mission. So last thing, I spoke to Ford Corporate this week, and I'm trying to drag out of them what's coming down the pike.
Right.
They don't want to share, which is a huge mistake, I think. We ordered a hybrid Explorer back in mid-22. We just received it. And I said, hey, great, will there be more of these? And they said, well, we're not going to produce any more till the end of 25. And I'm like, okay, is that because you're going to be all EV soon? And they said, yes. Well, great. What models are coming? They couldn't tell me. I think for a reason, probably beyond my position in life. But I'm excited about getting public safety on board, because I'm doing it, or we're doing it. It's becoming a success.
Great, and just to clarify that, I think, I'm not suggesting that we have public safety drive the Leaf while they're on duty. It's a question of their commute and whether we might, over time, as we renegotiate, have some creativity about supporting those that don't have a fleet vehicle already. Longer conversation, but just to get the wheels turning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe even handling the tolls on 66. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you. I have to go see those cars. Any other questions, colleagues, for the moment? Matt?
I know we try to close often this session by thanking those folks who are making our sewer and water and everything. And you said very well of our public servants in this particular area, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right. Love the new graphic. Thank you. That's just great. And actually, this board is new. At some point, I still think we should do a video where everybody was recounting that huge water main break that we repaired up by Key Bridge. Do you remember that? That was one of the most exciting board meetings. It was like, what happened then? Then what did you do? The ground is shaking. It was really cool. And I will remember, I said, the team was so different. As I recollect, the woman who was in charge of it all was about 5 feet tall. And it was just an amazing kind of team and what happened. And it was, I think, at night. And anyway, so I've only got about 9 more months, but I would love to get that video because I think we could, do something with that. So thank you for everything you all do. And I know one of the things I love about the graphic is it shows what's underground, which is, people don't think about it, but it's so important because when it doesn't work, then we really do hear about it and it's not good. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, colleagues, that concludes this work session. So our next work session, we will come back here, and I had it up here. That will be on Thursday at 3 o'clock. And let me see if I can just pull up exactly what it is so I get it. CPHD, Housing and Human Services, DHS. That's full. And we've got 3 hours. We may end up going longer on that one. We will figure that one out. So for this moment, we are adjourned. But we'll be right back here for a special meeting at 6 o'clock, I believe, is what we're doing. Thank you. And we have 2 items that are very time-sensitive, 1 and 2 Crystal Houses site plan and AHIF funding, and then also something on the Ballston Station permanent supportive housing agreement. Those will be pretty quick items that we need to do quickly and get done. So we'll be back here at 6. Thank you.